On today's show, high-level ninja strategies for real estate investing. We're going to talk cost segregation, multifamily apartments, and how to take all of the taxable benefits of owning real estate. That's on today's show. And when you're done with today's show, you're going to have a deeper understanding of what in the heck cost segregation is all about, how to maximize your tax benefits. That's coming up.
Here we are at our very first rental property.
I'm Clayton Morris, longtime real estate investor and founder of Morris Invest. And our goal with this show is to help you build financial freedom and build your financial intelligence. If you're just getting into this, our goal is for you to be able to help educate your family, your friends about the benefits of owning rental real estate. I've got a great guest on today's show. He's a doctor. And we have kind of a little running theme here on the show about those in the medical profession. We've worked with a lot of clients in the medical profession who aren't necessarily so great with their money, but Dr. Dan Handford is. He has done tens of millions of dollars in deals, $67 million. He owns over 825 apartments, and he helps others in the medical field take action and become real estate investors as well. And he actually, today, we just got to speak with him on a day where he's about to do a big multifamily deal. Dr. Dan, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Clayton, for having me on. Looking forward to sharing what I can with some of these strategies with your listeners.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have you here. So give us a little background. What part of the country are you in right now? And I know you're kind of dealing with Hurricane Alley right now down there in South Carolina. But tell us about where you are, how you got started in real estate investing, and hope you don't mind my little jab about those in the medical profession.
No, that's perfectly fine. I totally agree with it, and 100%. And there's always, like I say, blind squirrels get a nut every once in a while. So every once in a while, there's definitely that rare person in a crowd or in a bunch that's a little bit different than everybody else. But you definitely hit the nail on the head as far as physicians and the inability to really manage money very well. And it's not really where their strengths are. But, as far as me, I'm actually right now in Columbia, South Carolina. That's where I live. That's where our business is. And we have 5 medical practices in the state of South Carolina, kind of spaced across the entire state. And my background has been building up these medical offices into what they are today. So we have just under 50 employees in those practices. And we do non-surgical orthopedics. We do a lot of orthopedic treatments for spine and joint, and do a lot of regenerative medicine, so a lot of PRP, stem cell, prolotherapy, those kind of things. And prior to that, I even have other online businesses that I have. So right now I have about 8 businesses. I say about because depending on where I am, I might have a little bit more than that, but I have 8 core businesses that provide a constant income stream for me. And then earlier in this part of the year is where I really started to dive really deep. So I've been doing a lot of research. I've been doing some commercial investing over the years with the medical practices, but really started diving deep into doing some pretty heavy, large 100-plus unit multifamily properties in the first part of this year. And I've been doing that full time ever since.
So take me back to that first deal when you were looking at, you talk about these medical complexes, and it's something my wife and I have actually been talking about in the commercial space, because commercial's tricky right now. And you have carved out quite a niche for yourself with other medical professionals in those, I guess, sort of, how would you describe, maybe small strip mall where, I mean, I've definitely gone to get chiropractic work or dental work done in one of those like small sort of mini little strip malls, right?
Sure. Yeah, so some of our practices, I think probably like maybe 1 or 2 are in those types of practices. Really one of them is, and then the other 4 are in what are called MOB, so medical office buildings. And so we actually have a space inside of those medical office buildings. And it is a little bit of a tricky space right now. I was actually, hosting a meetup in Charlotte, North Carolina that we do for real estate investors last night. We do it once a month. And I had a developer from New York City that was in town, and he came to the meetup, and he had just gotten a purchase on a large 12-acre lot. And he came up to me and he said, "What would you recommend? Would you recommend me putting commercial there, or like a strip mall, or medical offices, or maybe even doing some multifamily on that property?" And so we had to have that long discussion of what the upcoming market correction, if you will, whenever that's going to come, and trying to do a little bit of a speculation on that, because it's kind of hard when you're doing new development. You're really trying to you really are getting into that speculation phase because you don't have a stable asset. But we were able to have that conversation of, is commercial more stable than or more risky than multifamily, and especially when you know that there's some sort of a correction coming up in the market. And my opinion is whether it's single family rentals or multifamily rentals, those right now are the place to be, because that's whenever there is a market correction, people can't buy houses. What are they going to do? They're going to rent. And as you've mentioned on prior podcasts, the multifamily as well as the rental market, the single families, we are becoming a renter nation, and that's where people are looking for is to find those good quality rentals.
Right. And we'll dive into multifamily. I'm a single family rental kind of guy. You've been doing multifamilies, but first you have these medical complexes that you've been sort of taking over. So you haven't been doing ground up construction. You've been going in and taking them over, stabilizing them, correct?
Correct. That's correct.
So take me through some of those early deals that you were doing in the medical complex. How did you see value there? And how did you manage to come in, take it over, do a renovation on it, and then maybe reach out to dental offices, medical professionals? How did you work that?
Sure. So most of the offices that we have from the medical practice standpoint are actually us going in and finding an actual space and renovating it for our particular purposes. So we have our one unit. So we don't actually have the entire building itself. But in our space, we were trying to create a business and a practice with the least amount of upfront costs. So when you have commercial spaces, obviously the landlord is the one who's going to be wanting to spend money on, trying to renovate a property or, increase the rents by doing some of that capital expenditure or those capital improvements. But in our space, we were trying to find spaces that needed very little, almost like a turnkey medical practice where we could actually go in. The exam rooms were already built out. The waiting room was already built out. We were going in there, basically, like, if you will, like putting lipstick on a pig, painting it, reflooring it, those kind of things, and maybe putting in some new countertops and really trying to take it over with the minimal amount of cost. I mean, each one of these practices we were able to start for less than $100,000. That includes the actual capital improvements to get the interior renovations to where we wanted. And so that was really what our strategy was there. We have our own practice, we have our own location and our own units, and going to try to stay in those units as long as possible.
That's great. And I imagine some of that has probably spilled over to your thinking about maybe not over upgrading on your multifamily purchases, right?
Yes, absolutely. So that's one of the things that's a really bit of a challenge, because I like these nice upgrades. I like the granite countertops. I like stainless steel appliances and those kind of things. And so when you go into a multifamily property, like we try to find C and B class properties that have some value add component where we can actually do some interior renovations, do some grounds, add some amenities, maybe even reposition it from a C to a B class property, which is what we're doing in a deal that we have coming up that you talked about earlier in Greenville, South Carolina. We have a pretty heavy CapEx budget that's going to be repositioning that property from a Class C to a Class B. But it's very hard because you go in there and you're like, if I was going to live here, what am I going to put in this property? And you can't always look at it that way. You have to kind of do your comp analysis of the area and see what are the other apartments in that class providing in that market, and what can I do to level up just a little bit to be able to command a better rent and a higher rent than where I'm at now, but not trying to put in, like you said, granite countertops and these high-end amenities that really people like, but they don't necessarily pay more rent for. It's
Right.
a very
That's
hard
the
balance
key.
there.
That's the key.
Yep.
And you said two things there, right? They're not going to pay more rent for it. And the other key thing that you said there is, I like it. But that, you're not renting this property.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the hard part, is because you go in there and you're like, oh well I want this and I want that and I could put this in, but you have to step back and go, okay, is that going to command more rent? Because I know if I was in that property, I'd pay a little bit more for that. But what kind of a class property is that? What kind of tenant base are you trying to attract? And you need to try to appeal to that tenant base and not try to attract to a different tenant base where you can't command those same rents for the dollars that you're putting in for that renovation.
Now, let's talk about some of these multifamily strategies now. We talked about at the beginning of the show some sort of advanced strategies for investors. We had an episode recently with the great Ken McElroy, who's a longtime multifamily investor. commercial investor. I mean, he's done it all. He started as a property management property manager many years ago. And you had mentioned to me that there were some things that you would love to add to some of the things that he was saying. And if our listeners didn't get a chance to listen to that interview with Ken, where he's talking about the current market with multifamilies, he's saying right now he's just not buying any multifamilies because it's very difficult to find the deals out there. And he's actually been selling some of his larger multifamily. He sees single family as one of his strong plays right now. So that made me happy as a single family investor. But I know, it's all relative, right? Because you can still find deals. You just have to look a lot harder. So you're actually in the middle of a deal right now that you're going back and forth with the seller on. And is that kind of where you wanted to maybe had taken some umbrage with something that Ken said? I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit.
Sure. So I think everything that Ken said was pretty spot on. There's just a few additional things that I thought might help your listeners and help your audience a little bit when it comes to these multifamily properties, because there are, when you look at what people are paying for these properties, you can't always just look at it from a cap rate standpoint or the dollars that they're spending on it, or just looking at it from your own underwriting perspective. Because even from our type of investors that we attract the higher net worth individuals that are accredited investors that put a lot of their money into these types of properties, and they're not only looking for the cash on cash returns, they're looking also from the tax advantages of it. And once you start to get in some of these larger multifamily properties is when you can start to afford to build in the costs of what's called cost segregation. And so I know some of your listeners probably don't know what cost segregation is. And so basically cost segregation allows you to hire an outside engineer firm to come in, and it usually costs pretty, significant amounts of money. I say significant. I mean, it's $20,000-$30,000 depending on the size of the property, to have them come in and actually study your property, break it down all the way from the screws in the studs, the sheetrock, the flooring, the insulation, the roof, the appliances, the doorknobs, the doors. I mean, everything is actually broken down and pieced out, and you can now do what's called accelerated depreciation on certain parts of that property, where you're able to accelerate it to, instead of just depreciating that asset over 27.5 years, you're able to accelerate that to 5 to 15 years. So it increases your depreciation. And also, Trump recently enacted his new tax law last year, and so we were able to add on an additional $1 million, up to $1 million of additional depreciation year one on any type of renovations that we're performing. And so all of those types of things are calculated into an underwriting a property, because if you have individuals that want that depreciation that can offset some of their other passive income and show even greater losses from the depreciation aspect, it also allows them to reduce their taxable liability, pretty significantly, depending on the type of person and what kind of an investment they did into the property.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because a lot of investors and a lot of high net worth investors aren't necessarily even going after the cash flow at a certain point, right? Maybe they have their portfolio of 50, 60 properties that cash flow nicely for them. But then those high net worth individuals are really starting to look for those tax shelters. And so the amount of cash that's being spun off, not necessarily terribly important to them, but the tax shelter, being able to depreciate in that first year and then offset the other income that they're bringing in, can be a really valuable asset for them, right?
Right, and of course, you also have to look at groups that are trying to 1031 their money into a property. I think that's one thing that Ken talked about, was people trying to, be forced into buying a property just to put their money somewhere so they're not being taxed in other areas. And so that's one aspect of why some people will overpay for a property. And this deal that we're doing in Greenville, we submitted the offer on it, and we got into the best and final round. So there's probably 4, 5, or 6 people still into that best and final round. And the seller now, because of the type of market we're in, the type of competition that's around right now, they made some additional, requirements, which kind of, it didn't really shock us because we've seen it on some other properties, but, it also kind of makes you wonder what kind of a market we're in right now, because we are in a very strong market, and that's a very solid market. This property is located in Greenville, South Carolina. It's a 130 unit property, and the whisper price on this property from the broker was $8.8 million. And so we put our offer in just under 8.8 and got into best and final, and then got 2 additional things added on. So they increased the pricing guidance from 8.8 to 9.1. So they increased it by $300,000, which again, we actually underwrote the deal at a larger amount. We underwrote it at 9 million. And so it was actually working pretty well, even at 9.1. But we decided to kind of stay under the 9 million just because we didn't really, if the other people that are in this property, that are bidding on this property, aren't looking at it the way we are looking at it, as a reposition, putting a large CapEx budget in place, then they're probably not going to be able to reach, they are not going to be able to get the returns that we're projecting on this deal. I mean, we're projecting some pretty good returns on this.
You put a big capital expenditures budget aside because you want to add as much value as you can to this property. You would think that the other investors would be that smart. So what type of value are you looking to add to this property? That's why you're saying to yourselves, we can go above 9.1 million if we have to.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're doing is so this property has a beautiful pond and feature on the property, and it has been not taken care of very well. It's been kind of unkempt, and it's very hard to see from the road, but it's right off of one of the major arteries in Greenville, South Carolina, about 10 minutes from downtown. And a lot of your A-class retailers are now starting to go into that market as well, and the whole Greenville downtown is starting to grow towards that area. And so we're trying to reposition this thing from a C to a B-class property, and in doing that, we're going to have to go in and increase some of the interior upfit. So obviously, we're not going to be putting in really beautiful granite countertops. We're going to put in nicer countertops, replacing the cabinets, replacing the appliances, replacing the light fixtures, changing out the windows, getting some additional tax credits from energy savings, because there's also that you want to make sure that you're underwriting in a property where you can change out some of the features but also get benefits from tax credits at the same time. And so from the tax standpoint, from cost segregation, as well as those tax credits from the energy savings standpoint, you can also capitalize on realize some more gains that way too. But we're also renovating the pool area. We're adding a dog park. We're tearing down the playground area and moving it to a different area so that you can actually use the playground.
Wow.
And we're also doing this property has a interior, like a hotel style entrance into each one of the units. So you don't enter it from the exterior, you go into an interior hallway. And so it's a great property to be able to reposition from that C to B class, as well as for renovating the interior units and also upfitting the grounds as well, because some of the grounds are terrible. We're going to tear out a lot of the trees that are in there and put up beautiful palm trees, and a lot of times just putting in palm trees can sometimes increase the appeal of that property. And so we've seen that in another property in Greenville where it was actually in a C class, really like a lower C, almost a D class area. And it was they repositioned it from a C to a B, which is quite odd in that kind of an area, but they were still able to command those rents and then do a refi about 18 to 24 months later, pull out a majority of their initial capital, and then continue to hold on to the property. So that's kind of the play with this property, is to go in there, do some of those heavy lifting CapEx renovations, and then stabilize and turn over the property within 18 to 24 months, and then refinance it into a more permanent debt structure.
How much time, because I think if someone's just getting started in real estate investing, don't let this scare you. I mean, look, the good doctor here has spent a lot of time and looking at this structure and going through this process. He understands the benefits of cost segregation. This is not something that you just jump into on day one. When you looked at a project like this, Dan, how did you see the amount of time it was going to take for you to visualize this project? For instance, that this deal is out there. You go to the broker, you say, I want in. I guess you're going under contract sort of initially when you're going through the due diligence phase. How much time on site does your team have to kind of come up with these plans? We're going to put the dog park here. We're going to put the palm trees here. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so it is quite of an in-depth process, and we may not get the deal. So we might spend all this time and effort and energy, and then at the end of this week when we're supposed to see whether or not we get accepted, we may not even get it. But this is the kind of thing you have to go through right now in this market to be able to try to find these properties. And the more stuff that you do right now, like for this particular property, that you can show a seller that you're doing almost like pre-due diligence phase before you even get the offer accepted, that you're doing all this additional work, the more convinced they are that you really want it and that you can actually close the deal. And so, plus, I mean, they're also doing some strategic things about making, the money hard day one from as far as the earnest money. And so it'll be a non-refundable earnest money day one of $100,000, and then more as you go progress through the due diligence phase. But biggest thing on these properties is we tour them first before we do anything else. Once we look at the original or the initial offering memorandum, if we review the offering memorandum, we do a basic underwriting on it, and we like the property, then we will walk it. So this was actually a unique property in that we looked at it originally as far as from the underwriting and the number standpoint, and it didn't work. Like, we couldn't make the numbers work. And so we actually put it off to the side, and we decided to go tour the property and just kind of see what the property was about. And so we toured the property, and we kind of annoy a little bit the property manager who tours the property with us, because we spend a lot of time measuring each one of the units that we tour, measuring the places that we want. We bring in a laser and we start lasering, and we do some 3D modeling and stuff like that. And so they get a little frustrated because they usually only give you like an hour and a half to tour it, but we might spend 3, 4, 5 hours on a property when we go there and really figure out the layout of the land, where everything is. We also get satellite imagery. We pay a little bit more on a software program we use that my partner has that does 3D imaging. So even if we look at a roof and see, oh, it needs to be replaced, we can do a satellite imagery on that property, get the exact scale and scope of that project. I mean, almost down to the penny on what it's going to cost us to renovate it, whether it's be from the roofs or from the exterior and even from the interior, because now we have the exact measurements. If I'm going to go spend $9 million on a property, I want to know what I'm buying. So if they want to complain because I'm spending a little extra time measuring their unit, I want to make sure what they're telling me and our measurements are correct too.
You got pizza delivery showing up for lunch. We're going to be here for a while, Mr. Property Manager. You can go back to your office. I love it.
Yeah, and of course, if we do a tour on a property and we just immediately don't feel it like it's going to work and kind of see the property, we're not going to spend that much time. But we went to this property and just really loved the property. But we always have to tell ourselves, we can't get emotionally involved in a property. We're going to put our best offer on it. If it doesn't get accepted, it's okay. We'll move on to the next one, and then the next one will hopefully, be one that'll get accepted.
That's a great point. Never get emotionally invested in real estate. I always say it's just real estate, and there's going to be other deals. So don't fall in love with that adorable little bungalow. Just because
I heard this recently. You should sell yourself with emotion, but close yourself with logic. So never get emotionally caught up with it too much.
That's right. And that's a great point. And that's a tough decision for an entrepreneur to make. And I want to say you host a great podcast called Tough Decisions for Entrepreneurs, which you were kind enough to have me on the show. We talked about real estate investing. And we spent more time talking about entrepreneurship and business building there, which was a good relief for me to talk about because I'm always talking about real estate. So tell me, you've done a lot of interviews. You've interviewed a lot of entrepreneurs, but I'm going to turn the tables a little bit on you, the questions you've asked other entrepreneurs about the tough decisions they've had to make. What about you? Was there a pivot moment in your career when you had to really say, I'm going to go one way over here, or I'm going to go this way over here, and you had to say goodbye to what had been holding you back?
Yeah, so one of the things that was one of the biggest tough decisions that I had was letting somebody go in my practice that I had. It was actually the office manager of that practice. It was letting them go even though they had done nothing wrong. I just felt like I wanted somebody in that position that I knew could take us to the next level. And that person that was in there, I just didn't feel like could take us to the next level. They were good at what they were doing, but they weren't going to be able to help us move the needle. They weren't going to help us be able to scale the way we wanted to scale. And that person was my wife that I wanted to bring in. So she was the one I fired.
Oh, I thought Sorry, honey, you're out.
Boom. No, she's the one I wanted to have in there. And at the time, we had just had 2 children. And so they were getting to the point where, they could be going into some more daycare. And she didn't come in full time, but she came in pretty much full time. It was like a part to full time position. And she came in to be able to help us scale and get to that next level. And the other hard part about that tough decision is it was right around the like Christmas and the end of the year where I really wanted to make that change. And you never want to let somebody go around that time of the year, right? So we had to make sure that when we let them go, it was actually after the first of the year, and we gave them a severance, and we think we did the right thing with it, but it was still a hard decision and a tough decision because, you know, you never know what's going to happen, because I'm letting somebody good go. I didn't have anywhere else for them to be put into the practice at the time. And so I think long term, it was a great decision, but it was very tough. And I think one of the toughest decisions that any entrepreneur has is letting somebody go sooner rather than later, because a lot of times you get your emotions caught up in that as well, and you try to sell yourself on all the reasons why you should keep somebody instead of just letting them go when it's time for them to go.
Yeah, that's a great point, and a great lesson for all of our watchers out there and listeners of the podcast. Dr. Dan Handford has been my guest on the Investing in Real Estate show. We're thankful that you've been here. Can you tell us where people can connect with you and what kind of projects you're working on lately, other than this big 135 unit property?
Yeah. So right now, the biggest deal we're working on right now is this 130 unit property. Usually we have about every quarter about 1 to 2 properties that we're trying to get under contract, trying to get under our belts, and looking primarily in the southeastern markets and some in the Texas markets. Our most recent acquisition was in Houston, Texas, a 264 unit deal, $15.3 million. Wow. But you can find more information about, our deals. And if you want to, jump on a call with me and talk about, some of the projects that we're working on, and, some of the ways that maybe you can help out or whatever, you can go to handfordcapital.com. That's HAND, like your hand on a Ford vehicle. So HANDFORD capital.com. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, so you can pretty much find me anywhere. So but I really do appreciate you, Clayton, inviting me on to come onto your podcast, and appreciate you being on mine as well.
Absolutely. Well, I love this perspective, and thanks for dropping some big knowledge bombs on us today. Dr. Handford, thank you so much. Great to see you, and hopefully you guys will dodge this hurricane bullet down there. Our thoughts are with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for joining us on the show. And thanks to all of you for subscribing. If you're not already a subscriber, please do. And please share this with someone you think could learn and build some financial intelligence in their life. Now, go out there, take action, become a real estate investor. I believe it's the #1 way to build wealth. We'll see you next time, everyone.